Unloved by his father, Prince Sado grew up as a sadly disturbed man. At the age of 27, the prince climbed into a wooden box at the order of his father, the reigning King Yeongjo. The box was then tied with a rope, topped with grass, and left before the upper palace in the scorching sun. Over the next 7 days and 7 nights, sounds from the chest emanated with Sado's cries for help and pain. On the 8th day, the chest was opened, and Sado was pronounced dead. This is the tragic story of Prince Sado. Korea had been for several years without an heir after the death of the beloved son of King Yeongjo in 1776. Over a number of years, the king's wives and concubines had given birth to a series of daughters, and he despaired of ever getting another male child. When Sado was born in 1735, his arrival was greeted with great rejoicing throughout Korea. According to tradition, the infant was set up in his own palace with an army of maids and governesses and servants. However, his father took little part in raising and looking after his upbringing, hence Sado was spoiled rotten and grew up doing just as he pleased. The result was a royal family tragedy. When Prince Sado's father bothered to stop by and visit his son, he was often highly irritable, and grew angry at even trivial missteps by his son. Sado grew up oscillating between a great fear of his father, and a desperate need to please him. However, pleasing King Yeongjo proved to be an arduous task since he was not inclined towards displaying affection. Whenever the two met, the king was far more critical than affectionate, making it difficult for Sado to meet his expectations. Over time, King Yeongjo gradually started to avoid his little son. On the other hand, Sado's mother Son Hui took it upon herself to visit him every day and tried to bring him up strictly with instructions always preceding affection. Sado was terrified of her too, and extremely careful in everything concerning her. As a result, Sado grew up feeling unloved and resentful. As the crown prince, Sado was married very young to Lady Haegyong, the daughter of a poor scholar but with an impressive lineage and grasp of knowledge. The bride and groom were both around 8 years old. Since the bridal couple were so young, their relationship was that of childhood playmates at first. They lived in separate households. Yet, the two children seemed to get along reasonably well. However, Haegyong was unable to offer substantial support to Sado. Fortunately, her father stepped in and provided the fatherly care for young Sado that he was sorely lacking. Towards the end of 1745, Sado fell seriously sick and behaved in a peculiar manner. When he recovered, he and his wife were temporarily moved to another palace, closer to his mother's mansion, so that she could help care for him. This illness seems to be a turning point for Sado. Despite his sickness, Sado became serious about his studies and athletic pursuits. However, his relationship with his father did not improve, and shortly after his recovery, Sado and Haegyong were again moved away from the palace, so that the king did not have to deal with him. Sado became even more isolated from his family because of this. At the age of 14, it was decided that Sado should begin full married life. Soon after, the couple had a child, who sadly passed away at the tender age of 2. As expected, this loss plunged both Sado and Haegyong into deep grief. However, a year later, they were blessed with the birth of another son in 1752, bringing a glimmer of hope to the young couple's lives. Unfortunately, Sado's peculiar behavior took a turn for the worse. Historians speculate that an attack of measles exacerbated his already agitated state, and Sado began having hallucinations and nightmares. He believed he could see the god of thunder, and had an irrational fear of the sky. Sado was convinced he would be blamed by his father for any thunderstorm that hit the country. He would take hours to dress and choose clothes. His clothes became associated with the weather, and would please or displease the sky gods on criteria only he could understand. Despite this, King Yeongjo started giving Sado more official responsibilities, especially the ones he did not want to do. This included supervising the torture of imperial prisoners, which did not help Sado's mental state. Both Sado and King Yeongjo engaged in affairs with court ladies, fortunately with different individuals. However, this did affect their already poor relationship, as Sado had 2 sons with his concubines and Yeongjo had 2 daughters. Yeongjo was extremely jealous of the 2 sons. To make matters worse, the brother of one of Yeongjo's concubines was giving Yeongjo daily reports of Sado's peculiar behavior. The tension reached a breaking point when Sado visited the queen on her deathbed, only to be met with berating and screaming from his father. Overwhelmed, Sado escaped through a window and returned to his palace in distress. His condition continued to deteriorate, and he began experiencing stammering episodes, further reflecting the depth of his suffering. In the summer of 1756, the king unexpectedly visited his son. He found him in a state of mental confusion, and he incorrectly assumed his son was drunk. He rebuked him bitterly, gesticulating and shouting. After he left, Sado became violent. While he was chasing his servants, the palace caught fire. From that moment forward, Sado's behavior was violent and erratic. He dealt with most problems and distress by taking it out on his servants with violence. When his beloved sister passed away, he vented his grief by beating several eunuchs. Shockingly, he even executed a eunuch by beheading, then he had the corpse's head put on a stick, which he carried around with him. Soon afterwards, he took lives of a great number of maids at random. Everyone close to the crown prince was completely terrified. Throughout this dark period, his wife, Lady Haegyeong, made valiant efforts to pacify and soothe him to the best of her abilities. However, shortly after, Sado brought in a new concubine. Although he had very little money of his own, he set her up in extravagantly furnished apartment. When the king discovered, he was overcome with rage, visibly expressing his anger by stamping the ground. The distressed crown prince, overwhelmed by the situation, threw himself into a well. Fortunately, the well was filled with ice, enabling the guards to rescue him promptly. Hearing of this incident, his father became even more infuriated. In January 1761, during a sudden attack of insanity, Sado injured his concubine critically. She died shortly afterwards. According to recorded accounts, Yeongjo confronted Sado, questioning the reasons behind his criminal actions. In response, Sado expressed his anguish, stating that he committed those acts because he was in pain and felt unloved by his own father. Furthermore, he developed a heavy drinking habit, which was considered a significant breach of Korean societal norms. By 1762, the safety of everyone within the palace, whether family or servant, was at a great risk. On many a day, several bodies had to be carried out of the palace. Sadly, Sado didn't even seem to know that he was destroying people, as he was in a semi-lucid state most of the time. Sado turned his dangerous behavior towards his younger sister. He tried to assault her. The situation had reached a critical point. Something had to be done. Eventually, the crown prince's father, King Yeongjo, had enough. He determined that he could not, in good conscience, inflict his criminally insane son upon the Korean people as their next monarch. Therefore, on July 4, 1762, Sado was summoned by his father, who ceremonially struck the floor with a sword and declared the crown prince deposed. However, that still left an unanswered question of just what to do with Sado. His father ordered him to take the honorable path by committing suicide, but the prince refused to do so. Court rules and taboos prohibited the outright execution of members of the royal family. Out of anger, the king ordered for a wooden rice chest approximately to be brought. He then ordered his son to climb into the box. Sado begged for his life, and for the first time uttered the word father instead of the normal Your Majesty. But Yeongjo ignored him. Sado, as he did so many times before in his sad life, obeyed his father, and climbed in. The box was then tied and the prince was left to die in the blistering Korean summer. On the 8th day, the chest was opened and Sado was pronounced dead. His body was buried in the royal tomb mound. These events became known as the Imho incident. After his death, his title of Crown Prince was given back to him and named posthumously as Crown Prince Sado. The really sad part about his life is that Crown Prince Sado was aware of his sickness, depression, and what he called a disease. He would often hurt himself and try to take his own life several times. He often mentioned what the point of living was. Yet, it seemed as though his father really had no tolerance for Prince Sado's mental issues. What do you think? Pretty wicked times, right?